In the simplest of terms, Studio Binder refers to the Auteur theory as the idea that the director is the author and primary creative force behind a movie. Instantly to mind comes the names of distinguished auteurs such as Tarantino, Hitchcock, Spielberg, the Quay brothers, etc. But shrouded from Western success lies the obscure, grotesque, and brilliant works of Czech animator Jan Svankmajer, the auteur you never heard of. His films are so far removed from mainstream media that it is easy to understand why he has remained relatively anonymous. Not only are his works complex entities likely to do your head in, they are also at times tediously long with underlying tones and themes they would not fit in at popular theatres around the world. Orgies, pedophiles, and murder are only some of the distressing matters he incorporates into his storylines, with a flair of dark humour. And such content is only heightened by the visuals that rise to the occasion with grotesque sequences of destruction and unnerving humanism in inanimate objects. So why, despite the perturbation, can we not take our eyes off the screen? It all comes back to the Auteur theory. Firmly planted in a small corner of the world's film industry, Svankmajer offers films like no other, painstakingly crafted absurdities that reflect his unique vision as a director. The hypnagogic convolution of themes makes it hard to pinpoint what exactly Svankmajer's vision is, where it stems from, or even how it is created. But, taking it from the man himself, it is clear that his perspective is as unique as it is personal.
Dětství, podobně jako sen, považuji za základní zdroje každé imaginativní tvorby.
This duo he refers to, childhood and surrealism, can be identified as the primary creative forces in all his films. But it is not recurrent themes that make him stand out as an auteur, rather than the alchemy of these themes and the eccentric techniques of which he is master, intricate stop motion and a meticulous dedication to detail, dark lighting, strange diegetic sounds, obscure props, etc. He works these conventions to bring to life his themes in a comedically eerie manner that is always visually fascinating, despite the complex connotations. To better explain how specific techniques heighten his exploration of this duo, and make him an auteur to rank alongside any other, I will talk about Alice, Neko z Alenki 1988 and Dimensions of Dialogue 1983. The first is a feature film based on Lewis Carroll's classic story Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and the latter a short film of original concept showcasing a montage of heads engaging in curious conversations. Let's look at surrealism first. Surrealism is the artistic movement of liberating the rational and subconscious mind, often associated with a dreamlike state, from the trappings of logic and reason that society normally adheres to. As a self-proclaimed surrealist, Svankmajer uses the concept of liberation to the seemingly absurd as a quintessential element in his films. The birth of this sentiment can be partly accredited to that home puppet theatre the young Svankmajer used to recreate the world around him. Later in life, this fondness for alternate realities found a more sophisticated platform in stop motion. Frame-by-frame photography that could be manipulated and edited to create a fascinating imitation of movement. In this process of bringing to life hidden possibilities, Svankmajer found a way to not only challenge the rational, but also engage viewers with the subconscious of their own minds. With this primal form of VXF stop motion under his belt, Svankmajer was drawn to source works with a whimsical take on fantasy, such as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. He has long regarded the classic as one of the most important and amazing works of literature produced by this civilization. No doubt because the book closely aligns with its own creative aesthetic. But whilst Svankmajer's film Alice is undoubtedly born from this source, he remains adamant that it is not an adaptation, but a subjective interpretation of what he finds so captivating in the literature. This is evident when comparing his films with other remakes, such as Disney's and director Tim Burton's. These films retell the stories of fairy tale, with morals and a need to teach a younger audience it was geared towards. Svankmajer's interpretation, on the other hand, is not geared towards children. He sees the classic as a realized dream, and through stop motion brings forward a less familiar type of fantasy, layered with violent and unsettling tones. A prime exemplar of this extra layer of surrealism created by stop motion is in the memorable shrinking scene. Upon drinking an unlabeled bowl, Alice, our curious protagonist, shrinks to the size of a china doll, literally. She goes from being a real child to a china doll. All humaneness is somehow encompassed within an inanimate doll that stares at the camera lens with inky dead eyes. The doll then goes on to show a range of emotions, anger, frustration, and sadness, all apparent in the unseen manipulation that occurs behind the scenes, the frame-by-frame gestural magic of stop motion. It is a form of mind bafflement, as the inanimate doll remains so alive and capable of free will despite it not actually possessing those qualities. And given the intangible qualities of humaneness to a grubby china doll, we can see a unique right of placing syllogistic traits in surrealist stop-motion situations. This makes fun of what we know and creates a humorous yet significant commentary on our reality. In the case of the shrinking scene, one can interpret this as an expansion of what we perceive to be acceptable in our own mental morphology. As to engage with the visuals, we must accept that a china doll is human, as funny and weird as it might seem. His earlier short film, Dimensions of Dialogue, reiterates this formula of stop motion and surrealism in a similar manner. The short film is a montage of 3 sequences between conjugal jumbles of props. The first sequence shows 2D heads that look to be straight out of a Giuseppe Arcimboldo painting, consuming, mutilating, and regurgitating each other. It gets increasingly grotesque as metal, paper, and food get less and less recognizable, turning into a grey pulp that loses all original characteristics. Not only the heads being crushed and chopped or destroyed though, the offenders also grow perpetually more and more weary, the movement becoming more sluggish as they are worn down in the process of assimilation. The final products are smooth clay heads that vomit more and more replicas of themselves. It is as memorizing as it is eloquent. Svankmajer is pointing at the way that individualism is broken down, how people are molded to fit an ideal. The heads eating each other is a consumption of original thought and the continued disintegration of distinguishable features. Through stop motion, the social commentary enters the realm of surrealism, raising the viewer's awareness of the collective restriction of society by provoking the subconscious. Dimensions of Dialogue was made after a 7-year ban was lifted from Svankmajer that had previously prevented him from making any films. Following a period of liberation from censorship in communist Czechoslovakia, Soviet forces invaded the country and commenced a period of normalization to suppress the intellectual liberation that threatened the communist structure. This extended to harsh restrictions on the media, which stopped Svankmajer from releasing many of his films. Even near the tailgate of the communist oppression in the 1980s, censorship still minimized the attention his films received. Dimensions of Dialogue was even used as a deterrent exemplar of what was not allowed. Growing up and living in such a suppressive climate caused Svankmajer to deeply value the need for intellectual freedom, and that is why it is his personal style to recurrently use surrealism to disengage the viewer from the constructs of logic and reason. It is ironic, however, that stop motion has played such a big part in this, as it takes excruciating manipulation and control to create a world of freedom and surrealist possibilities. Integrated techniques that strengthen the dreamlike state Svankmajer constantly creates are lighting and camera angles. But currently, lighting is disproportionate within shots, with harsh cast shadows juxtaposition in lighter areas. It feels like it is night and you have turned off all the lights to try and chase away the dark. With this unnatural use of lighting, Svankmajer visually evokes a setting that can be compared to a feverish nightmare, which, as surrealists suggest, is not far from the actual playing field. The camera angles add to this febrile environment. Medium and barely passable long shots take much of the running time. Confined within small rooms that hardly allow her any stretching room, Alice fills the screen. And then, when there is more room, dim lighting continues to censor the walls are closing in, pressing down on Alice, and distorting the audience's expectation of space. This sense of constriction, combined with bleak surroundings, allude to the entrapment, showing the boundaries of fear and making it further seem like a nightmare. The only times we really see any wide shots of empty space is when Alice converts into the china doll. Here the shots show our character in relation to her surroundings, which is a welcome break from the cramped settings. The change from living human to humanesque doll in concurrence with the wider camera shots creates a parallel with how perception changes reality. Before I elaborate on more techniques, I have to introduce a second theme of significance: childhood. Svankmajer's childhood is an extremely important aspect that has influenced his personal style, and it sheds further light on the deeper meaning of his films. As we already know from his continued fixation in puppetry, certain childhood experiences have stuck with Svankmajer throughout his whole life, causing him to consider childhood to not be a closed chapter of my life. This is evident by the moments of childlike distraction which add humor to his film and play to the less sophisticated side of adult audiences. In these moments, Svankmajer uses the bizarre to shift his audience's field of vision, simultaneously creating amusement and suspending the intellect. We see it when Alice sits in a pool of her own tears and a mangy rat climbs to make camp in her hair, cleaning its ear with a minuscule little finger. When two heads can't agree on what belongs to who. When the white rabbit admires his disjointed reflection in the mirror, etc. Another layer of comedic effect is the signature sound effects Svankmajer adds to his films. Because stop motion is photographed movement, there is no actual sound involved. Thus, stop motion sequences require a manufactured soundtrack that will work with the on-screen action. Svankmajer took full advantage of this creative freedom to alter the texture, volume, and pitch of the noises occurring in his films. The result is another albacore of his personal style, comedically loud and poignant sound effects that are particularly well paired with self-aware moments of absurdity. Usually wind instruments appear, clockwork gears are heard clicking, and such things as the rubbing of dry surfaces are used to heighten the experience to a level of childlike perception, one that encourages audiences to indulge in a world of amusement. Another childhood experience that is weaved into his film is food. As a child, Svankmajer did not possess a healthy appetite, and was subject to severe methods to try and resolve this issue, such as drinking wine with iron pills and being sent to fattening camps. The heightened focus on consumption no doubt impacted on young Svankmajer, turning food from a pleasurable experience to a much more distasteful one. And this perspective translates in a very distinctive visual theme that runs through his films. We see this in Alice during the Mad Hatter Tea Party, which shows butter smeared over a rusty pocket watch, when Alice consumes an empty bowl that changes her, when a bread roll grows nailed. The food is either given unnatural characteristics or used in a nauseating manner, taking the appetizing factor out of the equation. By not portraying food as a naturally pleasurable thing, Svankmajer points to yet another aspect of civilization's urgency for survival and control. This concept is even more successful through the physical disgust Svankmajer's personal style is able to convey. A head composed entirely out of vegetables is mashed to a pulp, which via extreme close-ups becomes uncomfortably intimate in a grotesque fashion. Every interaction that occurs in this destruction is an unnatural textural experience. Greasy chicken smothered in paper, old metal keys pierced in a cabbage, measuring tape strangled in an apple. Add to this Svankmajer's squeamish, exaggerated sounds, and you have yourself a tactile dimension that taps into the unconscious sensory responses of his audience. Svankmajer's childhood is apparent in his film, but in his choice of props we can also recognize a certain nostalgia for the past. The inanimate objects he brings to life, taxidermy creatures, old-fashioned toys, skeletons, food, puppets, etc. They are all objects of the mundane, of a faraway childhood, of a life no longer there. By also being visually imperfect, these objects give the sense of being worn down by play, love, and time. There is something fundamentally melancholy in an old man patiently rebirthing the forgotten objects of his childhood. Mostly this is observed in Alice when, despite the vibrancy and amusing encounters she has with these magical creations, there remains an underlying sense of emptiness that no amount of animation can erase. The mad hare, scurrying around manically, wheelchair-bound, and looking a day away from falling apart. The caterpillar tirelessly sewing himself asleep, and even the china doll Alice becomes, looking increasingly worse to wear. This then brings to the table the darker side of his creative aesthetic, one that feeds off the perturbating confusion that occurs when childhood tumbles into surrealist terrain. These main creative forces that Svankmajer uses, surrealism and childhood, instinctively overlap into each other. The imaginative freedom that childhood possesses before the exposure to the rigid confinements of normality and reason is exactly the terrain that surrealism looks to unlock. Svankmajer not only uses his films to address creative suffocation, but also as a means of self-therapy, commenting that, how can you free the viewer unless your own creative work frees you first of all? And whilst Svankmajer has been able to preserve his childlike creativity and curiosity through his surrealist filmmaking career, his own experience formed it into a more morbid version of itself. This is evident in the underlying violence and frightening nature of his creations. What often commences in a humorous moment derails rapidly to reveal something more sinister. Take the white rabbit as an example, splitting at the seams and eating sawdust to survive, or the crackling pile of bones that follows his command, the characters who are beheaded. Repeatedly, this valley where surrealism and childhood meet can be associated with death. All the characters are incapable of real life, but through stop motion we exchange life for surrealism. Bones assembling distinguishable characters, chunks of meat skittering around pots, stuffed socks drilling through wood, etc. The fragility of life is dismissed, and death becomes just a new perception of reality, allowing inanimate objects to suddenly possess vividly animated abilities such as violence, destruction, and free will. Dimensions of Dialogue follows along the same lines, specifically elaborating on possessing the ability of destruction, love morphing to hate, heads rupturing from self-abuse, nausea and diminishment of solids, etc. Both films take fantasy and childhood elements to their darker extremes. With no boundaries between his two creative forces, Svankmajer strips away the expectations and pushes audiences beyond polite or moral restraints. Svankmajer's audiences embark on a journey in tactile worlds of humor, fear, and disgust. It is true that he doesn't offer the feel-good formula of mainstream films, but this is precisely why his films shouldn't be overlooked. Interweaving surrealism and childhood, Svankmajer entertains us with the bizarre, but he also brilliantly harnesses the deeper meaning of both to communicate a message with his personal signature. The alarming, trippy, and absurd worlds he creates offer liberation from the constructs of our collective reality and challenge our amnesticized minds. For that alone, he should be applauded. From his days of puppet playing to being banned by communist Soviets, and now as an old man, Svankmajer has never strayed from his personal journey of liberation through surrealism, and all his films, not only Alice and Dimensions of Dialogue, reflect this passion of expression through his distinctive personal style. Close-up, sound effects, digital motion, dark lighting. It is this combination of interior meaning manifested in distinctive techniques and themes that make Jan Svankmajer worthy of being called an auteur. So, if you're ever in the mood for something non-conventional, a bit unnerving perhaps, dig around the lost files of the internet and indulge in the rationale of a Jan Svankmajer film, even if only for a moment of release from your logic-bound existence.